بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. I begin with the blessed greeting of Assalamu alaikum. I pray that you are well, and I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects you and your family. For all those who have been affected by COVID, I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you shifa, a complete healing, and rewards you for your patience and for what you had to endure. For those of us who still have not contracted COVID, I pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects us. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Inshallah, we are still scheduled to reopen this upcoming week, and so I hope to see you all in person this upcoming week bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and reflect on a moment in the life of Umar ibn al-Khattab. In fact, a moment in the life of the companions. Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, when he was the Khalifa, the leader, the ruler of the Muslim world, he liked to listen to stories from the people around him. Umar, from those stories, he would derive lessons and he would get to know his community a little bit more. And one time he was sitting with a group of people and he asked the question, who from among the companions of the Prophet ﷺ had to endure the most difficulties and the most pain for the sake of the religion? And all of them agreed. It was Bilal radiallahu ta'ala an. Bilal, this man who was a slave in the beginning of the da'wah, the beginning of the prophethood of the Prophet ﷺ, and his master would take him out to the desert under the scorching heat in the summer, lay him shirtless on the ground. And we know that when the sun is hot, the floor is just as hot. And so they would lay him down and they would tie his hands and his legs and place a large rock on his chest and tell him, you will continue to endure this pain until you reject Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. And we know Bilal's response was Ahadun Ahad, one God, radiallahu ta'ala an. But in this gathering with Umar radiallahu ta'ala an was another companion, an early companion, someone who accepted Islam in the early days of the prophethood. His name is Khabbab ibn al-Arat. And he said in that moment, he said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, O leader of believers, look at my back. He took off his upper garment and showed those sitting down his back. And his back was described to be so severely scarred that there were enclaves, like cavities in his back, holes in his back. He said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, this is what I endured. Khabbab ibn al-Arat was of the weaker tribes of Quraysh, and so he also was tortured. But we are not as familiar with his story as we are with the story of Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhuma. Now, to really show you this individual, Khabbab ibn al-Arat, I want to take another moment in his life particularly. During the time of Mecca, when the Prophet and the companions were still in Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ was resting in the shade of the Kaaba, leaning his back on the Kaaba. The time was difficult. The companions were enduring oppression, persecution. They were being tortured. They were being attacked simply because they believed a certain belief. And Khabbab ibn Arat goes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, Ya Rasulullah, ألا تدعو الله لنا? ألا تستنصر لنا? He says, Ya Rasulullah, will you not make dua to Allah for us? Will you not ask Allah to help us get out of this situation? Now, Khabbab ibn Arat, this is a man who was so severely tortured. The amount of scars on his back is countless. The pain he must have endured is, unimaginable. This man was going to the Prophet ﷺ saying, Ya Rasulullah, very politely, can just make dua for Allah. Ask Allah to get us out of this situation. And what was the Prophet ﷺ's response? He said, the people before you, the believers who became before you and I, they endured even more than what you are enduring. However, the problem is, وَلَكِنَّكُمْ تَسْتَعْجِلُونَ. You are a hasty people. You're being hasty, O Khabbab ibn Arat. Now, Khabbab ibn Arat, he wasn't a person who, this is boring and it's been a day and I'm bored of this. We need things to move a little bit quicker. This man endured torture upon torture upon torture, perhaps years of torture. And in the midst of that, he asked the Prophet ﷺ, ask Allah to help us. And what was the Prophet's response? He gave us a lesson from the people before us so that we get inspiration from it. What I want to focus on is this last part. وَلَكِنَّكُمْ تَسْتَعْجِلُونَ. You're being hasty. There's a major lesson in this word of the Prophet ﷺ for you and I. What I have noticed in the younger generations, my generation and what they call Gen Z, the younger generation, your children, or maybe you yourself, there is a clear characteristic that we find common in these two generations. And that is we are very impatient. Impatient in a sense that we want things, we want results immediately. If things don't happen right now, then something is wrong. And in my own discussions with people and helping people through their own difficulties and concerns, I notice this. They'll come to me and say, Sheikh, it's been a week. Why aren't there results yet? Sheikh, it's been so-and-so. Are you actually doing something? Is something going to be done, or should I just go see my life? And I tell them, you really need to be patient. Things don't happen overnight. They simply don't. And so whatever you're concerned with, whatever you are striving for, whatever you are aspiring towards, everything requires time. Whether that's acquiring wealth. Listen to the advice of the real wealthy people. I'm not talking about the YouTube stars. I'm talking about the real wealthy people. Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, these other business people who really have become wealthy. Or maybe the wealthy folk in our community. Ask them the question, how long did it take you to really become wealthy? You rarely find someone under the age of 50 who is extremely wealthy. You might find one person here, one person there. That's rare. That's an exception. But when do people become truly financially stable, truly wealthy? It's normally after the 50s. Why? Because it takes time. That's what it is. And so, for example, Kevin O'Leary, what does he say? What does he advise younger people to do? He says, start investing small amounts, 10%, 20% of your income, and put it in the stock market. Try and find a company that provides dividends that you will profit, or you will profit somewhere between 6 and 9%, and just constantly, consistently put small amounts of money in your investment account. And by the time you retire, you'll have so much money in that account that the amount it generates every year will be enough to keep you self-sufficient. You don't even have to withdraw the principal. That is wealth. Look at knowledge, the scholars. Did they become scholars over day and night? They became scholars over decades. Decades of studying, decades of reading dozens of books. That's how they became scholars. Do you think major problems, whether social, economic, political, whatever it is, do you think they come about, the results or the good change comes about overnight? Absolutely not. Look at the Muslim world. The Muslim world has been struggling politically and socially for the past century. But that does not mean the efforts of those who are trying to bring positive change are meaningless, are fruitless. But the fact of the matter is everything takes time. Even the human being. How long does it take for the human being to really develop? They start off as an infant. And it takes them years before they can even become somewhat dependable on their own self. It takes them years to be able to even eat alone. To be able to realize, okay, I am hungry, I gotta go and eat. And it takes years upon years to build an education. And then you get married. Do you think love comes overnight? Love requires a lot of time. It requires a lot of experience with one another, sacrificing for one another. And so people who say love at first sight, I personally don't believe this. There might be an attraction, there might be a connection at first sight, but love needs to be built. And so what the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us here is a very important life lesson, whether it's in religion or not. Don't be hasty. Nothing good occurs overnight. Things require time, it requires effort, it requires sacrifice, it requires sweat and tears. But that is life. And that's the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thus we know from here that patience is a virtue. Patience is a virtue. Why? It's not because waiting around for something to happen is virtuous in of itself. No. But rather, patience is a virtue when the person is waiting, and as they are waiting, they behave with the best behaviors. They do what they're supposed to do. They continue to strive and to struggle for the cause. That's what's virtuous. And that's real patience. That's patience according to the Islamic understanding of this beautiful word. And also from patience, what do we need to understand here? That it is part of the way Allah created the universe, how Allah created the universe. Part of the fabric of the universe is the time, the passing of time. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ بَالِغُ أَمْرِهِ قَدْ جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدْرًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, His qadr, His decree will come to pass. What Allah wants to happen will happen. But He makes it in a qadr. He makes it at an appointed time. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants something to happen, He makes a time for it. And sometimes it's a year later, 5 years later, 20 years later. It took the Prophet ﷺ and the companions 20 years, over 20 years, to finally open Mecca, to finally become victorious in Arabia. 20 years, and this is the best man to ever walk this earth. This is a man who every decision he made was the best decision, ﷺ. And it took 20 years. Because that's how Allah created it. And so when someone becomes hasty, they go against the fabric of the universe, the way Allah created the universe. And so the Prophet ﷺ teaches us, Al-ajalatu min ash-shaytan. Hastiness is from the shaitan. Why? Because hastiness goes against the way Allah created the universe. Being hasty, trying to bring something about before its appointed time, goes against Allah's wisdom in how He created this universe. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is a very, very simple lesson, but it is an important lesson that I hope you internalize, that you live by, and you encourage the young ones around you and all people around you to really digest this, to understand this. The point is more than getting things done. Part of the end is the journey, as the saying goes. Part of the end is the journey. And so one of the wisdoms as to why Allah requires time to pass in order for results to come is so that you yourself work hard. And when you work hard, you gain many things that without that time, without that hard work, you're going to miss out on. That includes disciplining yourself. That includes strengthening yourself, developing yourself. You know, they say a person's personality develops between the ages of 20 and 40. 20 and 40, imagine that. And the Quran alludes to this. حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ وَبَلَغَ 40 سَنَةً. Until the person reaches the height. They reach full development. When? At the age of 40. But that's the wisdom. So that you grow. And as you grow, you gain experience. You gain insight. You work hard. You get the reward for your patience. You get the reward for your striving and your struggling. You get the reward for your intention. And so without the passing of time, you will lose all of that. And you will lose the sweetness of actually succeeding in your goals. And so, do not be impatient. We are going through major struggles, major challenges in our lives today. Whether that's in our personal lives, in our family lives, in our familiar lives, or communal issues, or economic issues, or political issues, whatever it is, there are struggles everywhere. But look at those struggles in light of this hadith. Things will come to pass, and things will change, inshallah, for the better. But it will take time for that to happen. What you need to do, oh brother and oh sister, is to understand what you can do. What you can do to bring about those changes. You shouldn't be worried about when those changes are going to happen, Be worried about what you need to do before those changes actually come about, so that you reap the reward of doing good and you taste the sweetness of striving and struggling and then finally reaching that success. And so I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless each and every one of you, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow this food for thought to be something of use to each and every one of us. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.